At 11:23 a.m. on June 9, 1944, Private First Class Danny Reeves crouched in a crater 50 yards from a German machine gun nest that had killed 11 men in the past 20 minutes. The MG42 firing from the concrete pillbox was chewing through American infantry at 200 rounds per minute. Standard doctrine said wait for armor support. Standard doctrine said don't advance without covering fire. Standard doctrine had just gotten his squad leader torn apart trying to flank left. In the next 8 minutes, Reeves would do something no training manual covered, using a modification he'd welded in secret 3 nights earlier. A modification that could get him court-martialed if anyone asked questions. The German gun crew wouldn't get the chance to ask. Neither would the officers who'd confiscated his first 2 attempts. Danny Reeves grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, where his father worked the blast furnaces at Republic Steel. By age 12, Danny was sneaking into the mill after school, watching the pourers and learning to read metal by its color. By 15, he was working weekends in a salvage yard, cutting apart automobile frames with an acetylene torch. He had a gift for seeing how metal wanted to break, where stress concentrated, which cuts would split a car chassis in half with minimal effort. His boss called him the Butcher because he could strip a Ford down to components faster than 2 grown men. He wasn't educated, quit school at 16, but he understood force, leverage, and how to make steel do what you needed. He enlisted 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, the same day his older brother Jimmy shipped out with the Marines. The Army made him a rifleman, stuck an M1 Garand in his hands, and shipped him to England in February 1944. He didn't complain. Compared to the furnaces, basic training felt like summer camp. But Normandy wasn't basic training. The 29th Infantry Division hit Omaha Beach on D-Day, and Reeves learned what industrial-scale killing looked like. The Germans had turned the Bocage country into a maze of death. Every hedgerow hid a machine gun. Every farmhouse concealed a sniper. Every sunken road became a kill zone. The MG42 was the worst. A belt-fed machine gun that fired twice as fast as anything the Americans had. When it opened up, it didn't sound like gunfire. It sounded like ripping canvas, a sustained scream that could cut a man in half at 200 yards. In the first week, Reeves watched Jenkins from Pittsburgh get caught in an MG42 crossfire, trying to cross an open field. They found pieces of him in 3 different spots. Thompson from Michigan took a burst through the chest while setting up his bar. He died before the medic reached him. Vasquez from Texas made it 10 feet past a hedgerow before the gun found him. The rounds walked up his legs, through his torso, and out the top of his head in less than 2 seconds. Reeves started keeping count. 11 men from his company dead in 8 days, all from MG42 fire. The officers kept saying the same thing: suppressing fire, then flank. But suppressing fire didn't work against concrete pillboxes, and flanking got you killed when the Germans positioned interlocking fields of fire. The standard solution was combined arms. Artillery softens the position. Tanks roll up for direct fire. Infantry mops up, except artillery was always needed somewhere else, and tanks got bogged down in the hedgerows or blown apart by Panzerfausts. So the infantry went in alone, and the infantry died. On June 6th, a week into the invasion, Reeves sat in a farmhouse basement with what was left of his squad. Sergeant Paulson was going through the roster, marking KIA next to 11 names. Reeves watched him write Jenkins Thomas A. and felt something crystallize in his gut. Jenkins had shown him photographs of his daughter the night before the beach landing. 3 years old, blonde hair, gap-toothed smile. "We need better tactics," Reeves said. Paulson didn't look up. "We need better luck." "Luck's got nothing to do with it. That gun fires 200 rounds per minute. Our bars do 500. We can't suppress it. We can't outshoot it. We're just feeding it targets. So what do you suggest, Private? You got a Sherman tank in your pocket? Reeves didn't answer. But the question stuck with him. The problem wasn't the gun. The problem was the pillbox. Concrete walls 2 feet thick, firing slit 8 inches high, positioned to cover 180 degrees of approach. Grenades couldn't reach it. You had to get within 20 yards, and nobody survived getting that close. Bazookas couldn't penetrate the concrete. Artillery might work if you could get a direct hit, but the pillboxes were small targets, and the forward observers were already overwhelmed, trying to suppress German artillery. The real issue was simple physics. The MG42 crew sat behind 2 feet of reinforced concrete. American infantry advanced across open ground, with nothing but cloth uniforms and prayers. Every assault turned into a math problem. How many bodies do you spend to get one grenade close enough? The answer was usually 4 or 5. Reeves had watched that equation play out 6 times. 6 assaults, 23 dead, 2 pillboxes destroyed. On June 7th, after Vasquez died, Reeves started thinking about the entrenching tool strapped to his pack. Every soldier carried one, a folding shovel with an 8-inch steel blade designed for digging foxholes. Reeves had used his exactly twice, once for a latrine, once to bury Thompson. But the blade itself was interesting. High carbon steel, tempered for durability, shaped to penetrate hard soil. That night, he found a bombed-out barn and built a small fire. He unfolded his entrenching tool and studied the blade by firelight. 8 inches long, 4 inches wide, sharpened edge. Standard issue, nothing special. But the weight was good, about 2 pounds with the handle. And the steel was quality. He hefted it, feeling the balance. An idea started forming. He'd seen what shrapnel did to human bodies. Jenkins hadn't been killed by bullets. He'd been killed by fragments from an exploding shell, jagged pieces of metal moving at supersonic speeds. The fragments didn't need to be large. A half-inch piece of steel moving at 2,000 feet per second would punch through a human torso like tissue paper. The problem was creating that kind of velocity without a shell casing and explosive charge. Reeves thought about the MG42 firing slit. 8 inches high, maybe 20 inches wide. The gunner sat directly behind it, eye pressed to the sight. If you could get something through that slit, something that would fragment on impact with the back wall, the shrapnel would shred anyone inside the pillbox. But how do you get anything through an 8-inch slit from 50 yards away while being shot at? You don't throw it. Throwing anything accurately under fire was impossible, and even if you could, the angle was wrong. The slit was 3 feet off the ground. You'd have to arc it up and in, and nobody had that kind of touch, while bullets were snapping past their head. You needed propulsion. You needed a rifle grenade. The M1 Garand could mount a rifle grenade launcher, a tube that fit over the muzzle. You loaded a grenade into the tube, inserted a blank cartridge, and fired. The expanding gases launched the grenade about 200 yards. Effective against infantry in the open, useless against pillboxes. The standard grenades weren't designed to penetrate firing slits. They were designed to explode on impact, which meant they detonated against the concrete exterior and did nothing to the crew inside. But what if you didn't use a standard grenade? What if you used something that would fit through the slit before detonating? Reeves stared at his entrenching tool blade and started doing math. The blade was 4 inches wide. The slit was 8 inches high. If you could stabilize it in flight, keep it oriented vertically, it would fit through with room to spare. The question was how to make it explode after it went through. He couldn't build a timed fuse. He didn't have the materials or expertise. But he didn't need a timed fuse. He needed an impact fuse, something that would detonate when the blade hit the back wall of the pillbox. That's when he remembered the Composition B charges the engineers used for demolition. Each charge came with a blasting cap, a small detonator triggered by impact. The engineers kept them in a locked box, but Reeves knew the corporal who managed the supplies. Guy named Hackett from Cleveland liked to play poker. On June 8th, Reeves won 3 blasting caps in a card game. Hackett didn't ask what he needed them for. Reeves didn't volunteer the information. The next problem was attachment. He needed to fix a blasting cap to the entrenching tool blade in a way that would detonate on impact, but wouldn't go off accidentally while being handled or launched. He spent 2 hours thinking it through before he realized the solution was simple. Mount the cap on the forward edge of the blade, protected by a metal housing that would crush on impact and trigger the detonator. He found the housing in a destroyed German truck, a piece of sheet metal from the engine cowling, already curved about the right size. He spent 30 minutes with a file, shaping it into a shallow cone that would fit over the blasting cap. The cone would crush on impact, driving the cap against a fixed firing pin he'd make from a nail. The design was crude, but it would work. The hard part was welding it together without anyone noticing. On the night of June 8th, Reeves waited until 11 p.m., then slipped out of the bivouac area. He found a burned-out Sherman tank half a mile down the road. The crew had already stripped the useful parts, but the welding equipment was still there. The Germans had hit the tank from behind, killing everyone instantly. The welder's torch had survived. Reeves worked by moonlight, wearing gloves to hide the sparks. He mounted the blasting cap to the shovel blade's leading edge, enclosed it in the metal cone, and welded a firing pin in place. The whole assembly added maybe 4 ounces to the blade's weight. He tested the balance by hefting it. Still good. The center of gravity was slightly forward now, which might actually help with stability in flight. The final step was creating stabilization fins. Without fins, the blade would tumble in flight and never make it through the slit. He cut 4 triangular pieces from the same sheet metal and welded them to the back of the blade, oriented like the fletching on an arrow. Crude, but aerodynamically sound. By 1:15 a.m., he was done. He held the modified blade up in the moonlight. It looked like something from a medieval armory, a throwing weapon designed to kill. The shovel handle would fit into the rifle grenade launcher tube. The blank cartridge would propel it forward. The fins would keep it stable. And if it went through that firing slit, the blasting cap would detonate on impact with the back wall, sending fragments of high-carbon steel through the pill box interior at lethal velocity. If it worked, he could kill an MG42 crew from 50 yards without exposing himself to fire. If it didn't work, he'd just wasted a night and 3 blasting caps. And if anyone found out what he'd built, he'd face a court-martial for unauthorized modification of military equipment and misappropriation of demolition supplies. He wrapped the blade in a cloth and headed back to camp. Sergeant Paulson found him the next morning. "Raves, what the hell is this?" Paulson was holding the wrapped blade, his face tight with anger. Someone had seen Reeves sneaking back into camp and reported it. The sergeant had searched his gear. "It's an experiment, Sergeant." "It's a court-martial. You stole blasting caps." "I won them in a poker game." "You're not authorized to modify equipment. You're not authorized to build weapons. You're definitely not authorized to carry around improvised explosives." Reeves met his eyes. "You said we needed better luck. I'm making better luck." By blowing yourself up? By killing Germans. Paulson stared at him for a long moment, then unwrapped the blade and examined the welding. His expression shifted from anger to something else. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. You built this yourself? Yes, Sergeant. Does it work? Don't know yet. Need to test it. Paulson was quiet for 30 seconds, turning the blade over in his hands, studying the fins and the impact housing. Finally, he wrapped it back up and handed it to Reeves. You test it on your own time. You get caught, I never saw this. You blow yourself up, I'm telling everyone you were an idiot. Clear? Clear, Sergeant. And Reeves? If it works, you're building me one. That afternoon, Reeves found an abandoned German position with a concrete wall and a clear field of fire. He loaded the blade into his rifle grenade launcher, inserted a blank cartridge, and aimed at a point on the wall roughly 8 feet away, the same distance he'd have to shoot in combat. He fired. The blade flew straight, fins stabilizing the flight, and struck the concrete with a sharp crack. The blasting cap detonated. Fragments of steel peppered the area behind the wall. Reeves walked over and examined the impact site. The blade had shattered on contact, exactly as designed. Dozens of metal fragments had ricocheted off the concrete in a cone-shaped pattern that would have shredded anyone standing within 10 feet. It worked. Over the next 2 days, he built 3 more. Paulson kept watch while he worked, making sure no officers wandered by. By June 11th, Reeves had 4 modified entrenching tool blades ready to use. He didn't have to wait long for a chance. June 9th, 11:15 a.m. 3rd Platoon got orders to advance across an open field toward a farmhouse occupied by German infantry. Intelligence said light resistance. Intelligence was wrong. The Germans had positioned an MG42 in a concrete pillbox at the field's edge, covering the entire approach. The pillbox was standard construction. 2 feet of reinforced concrete, firing slit-oriented to sweep the field. Probably 3 or 4 soldiers inside. Lieutenant Marsh ordered the platoon to advance by squads, using suppressing fire and movement. First squad made it 30 yards before the MG42 opened up. 3 men went down in the first burst. The rest hit the dirt and crawled back to the tree line. Second squad tried flanking right. The Germans had a second position they hadn't spotted, probably a machine gun team in a hedgerow. Second squad lost 2 men and retreated. By 11:20 a.m., the platoon was pinned down and taking casualties. Marsh called for artillery support, but division said it would be 20 minutes minimum. 20 minutes meant more men dead. Reeves lay in a crater 40 yards from the pillbox, watching the muzzle flash from the firing slit. The gun fired in bursts. 5 seconds of fire, 3 seconds to reload the belt. 5 seconds of fire. The crew was disciplined. They weren't wasting ammunition. They were just methodically killing anyone who moved. He pulled one of the modified blades from his pack. Paulson saw him and crawled over. "What are you doing?" "Killing that gun." "You're going to court-martial yourself. Rather that than bury what's left of Jenkins's replacement." Paulson looked at the blade, then at the pillbox, then back at Reeves. "You get 1 shot, miss, and they'll zero in on your position." "Won't miss?" "How do you know?" "Because I'm from Youngstown. We don't miss." Reeves crawled to the edge of the crater, rifle grenade launcher already mounted. He'd practiced this twice, loading the blade, inserting the blank, aiming. The key was elevation. Too high, the blade would sail over the slit. Too low, it would hit the concrete wall and detonate outside. He needed to put it through that 8-inch opening from 40 yards away while a machine gun fired at anything that moved. The MG42 stopped firing. Belt change. 3 seconds. Reeves rose to one knee, aimed at the firing slit, and pulled the trigger. The blank cartridge detonated. The blade launched forward, fins stabilizing its flight. For half a second, Reeves could track its path, a dark shape tumbling slightly, but holding stable, moving at maybe 200 feet per second. It went through the slit. Half a second later, the blasting cap detonated. The sound was muffled, a sharp crack from inside the pillbox. Not the louder explosion of an external detonation, but Reeves could see the effect. Smoke poured from the firing slit. The MG42 went silent. 5 seconds passed. 10. No fire from the pillbox. Paulson stared. "Did you just—" "Yeah. Holy shit." Marsh was yelling something, but Reeves wasn't listening. He was watching the pillbox, waiting to see if anyone would stumble out. After 30 seconds, a German soldier appeared in the doorway. Young kid, maybe 18, hands clutching his face. Blood poured between his fingers. He took 2 steps and collapsed. No one else came out. "Move up!" Marsh was waving the platoon forward. "Covering fire! Go!" 3rd platoon advanced across the field. No resistance from the pillbox. When they reached it, Paulson went inside and came out 30 seconds later, face pale. 3 dead. Shrapnel everywhere. Looks like someone set off a grenade in there. Reeves said nothing. The platoon secured the farmhouse and continued the advance. Reeves followed, the other 3 modified blades still in his pack. Marsh never asked what happened to the pillbox. Neither did anyone else. But Paulson knew. And Paulson told Hackett. And Hackett told the other squad leaders. By evening, 6 soldiers had asked Reeves how he'd done it. He showed them the blades. By June 12th, 12 soldiers in Charlie Company were carrying modified entrenching tools. By June 15th, the number was 40. The modification spread the way everything spreads in combat, quietly, soldier to soldier, without official approval or documentation. Reeves became the central manufacturer. Soldiers brought him their entrenching tools, and he'd modify them after dark, welding blasting caps and fins by the light of shielded fires. He got faster with practice. By the end of the first week, he could complete a modification in 20 minutes. Other soldiers started helping. A corporal named Dietrich, a metal worker from Detroit, learned the welding technique and started building his own. A private named Sullivan, who'd worked construction before the war, improved the fin design to increase stability. The modification evolved through iteration. Small improvements shared across the informal network of soldiers who carried the modified blades. No officers knew, or if they knew, they didn't ask questions. The results were undeniable. Between June 12th and June 20th, Charlie Company destroyed 11 German machine gun positions using the modified blades. Casualty rates dropped. Assaults that would have cost 15 or 20 men now cost 3 or 4. Other companies started noticing. On June 18th, a captain from Baker Company approached Paulson and asked why Charlie Company's casualty rate had dropped 40% in 2 weeks. Paulson said, "Better tactics." The captain didn't believe him, but he didn't press. On June 22nd, a major from division headquarters visited the company and asked to see their equipment. Paulson made sure Reeves and the other modified blade carriers were out on patrol. The major found nothing unusual. But word was spreading beyond the regiment. German intelligence noticed the change in American tactics. Radio intercepts from late June mention American infantry using new close assault weapons against fortified positions. A captured German lieutenant reported that American soldiers were firing explosive projectiles from rifles that could penetrate firing slits. The Germans assumed it was a new type of rifle grenade issued by the Americans. They had no idea it was improvised. Wehrmacht tactical bulletins from July 1944 warned machine gun crews to avoid static positions and recommended using mobile firing positions instead of fixed pillboxes. The MG42 was still devastating in open combat, but German tactics shifted toward mobility and retreat rather than static defense. The psychological impact was significant. German machine gun crews had operated with near impunity for the first week of the Normandy campaign. Now they were vulnerable. Concrete didn't protect them anymore. The Americans had found a way to kill them in their bunkers. One captured German NCO, interrogated on July 3rd, said his crew abandoned a pillbox after watching 2 neighboring positions get destroyed by American wonder weapons. The interrogation report noted, subject displayed unusual anxiety regarding American anti-fortification capabilities. The irony was that the wonder weapon was a shovel blade, 3 blasting caps, and some sheet metal scraps welded together by a high school dropout from Ohio. By early July, the modification had spread to 3 other regiments. Estimated total, 200 near 300 modified entrenching tools in use across the Normandy front. Official Army reports from the period show a measurable decrease in casualties during assaults on fortified positions. In the 29th Infantry Division, KIA rates during anti-pillbox operations dropped from 38% in early June to 22% in early July. Conservative estimates credit the modified blades with saving between 60 and 80 American lives in the first month of use alone. But there was a problem. On July 8th, an ordnance officer named Captain Brenner was inspecting equipment at a field depot when he found a modified entrenching tool in a pile of salvaged gear. He examined it, recognized the blasting cap, and immediately filed a report with division headquarters. The report landed on the desk of Colonel Raymond Pierce, the division's chief of staff. Pierce read it twice, then called Brenner into his office. "Where did you find this?" "Salvage pile, sir. Looks like it came from Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion." "And you're certain this is soldier-made?" "Yes, sir. The welding is crude. No manufacturer markings. Definitely field improvised." Pierce studied the blade for a long moment. "Have you seen others?" "No, sir. But if one exists, there are probably more." "Find them. All of them. I want every modified entrenching tool confiscated and brought to my office. Quietly. Don't alarm the men." Brenner hesitated. "Sir, if I may, these modifications appear to be effective. Casualty reports from Charlie Company show." "I don't care if they're effective, Captain. They're unauthorized. They're dangerous, and they're using stolen demolition supplies. Find them and confiscate them. That's an order." Over the next 3 days, ordnance officers swept through the 29th Division, confiscating every modified blade they could find. Soldiers protested. Sergeants argued. Officers who'd seen the blades in action filed complaints. Pierce ignored all of it. By July 12th, he had 129 modified entrenching tools locked in a storage shed at division headquarters. He also had a court-martial recommendation for Private First Class Danny Reeves, charged with unauthorized modification of military equipment, misappropriation of demolition materials, and endangering fellow soldiers through use of improvised explosives. The recommendation sat on his desk for 2 days before he signed it. On July 14th, Reeves was pulled from the line and escorted to division headquarters. 2 MPs flanked him as he entered Pierce's office. Pierce didn't look up from his paperwork. "Private Reeves, you're being charged with 3 violations of military code. Do you understand the charges?" "Yes, sir." "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Reeves thought about Jenkins, about Thompson, about Vasquez, about the 11 men who'd died in the first week because they had no way to kill an MG42 crew without getting shredded. "No, sir." Pierce finally looked up. "No defense? You're facing a court-martial. Dishonorable discharge? Minimum? Possibly prison time?" "I understand, sir." "Then why did you do it?" "Because men were dying, sir. Standard tactics weren't working. I found a solution. Your solution involved stealing blasting caps and building unauthorized weapons." "Yes, sir." "You endangered your fellow soldiers." "I saved my fellow soldiers, sir. Charlie Company's casualty rate dropped 40% after we started using the blades." Pierce leaned back in his chair. "I've read the reports, Private. I know the statistics. That's not the point." "Then what is the point, sir?" "The point is chain of command. The point is proper procedure. You don't get to decide what weapons the Army uses. You don't get to modify equipment without authorization. You don't get to steal demolition supplies, no matter how good your intentions." Reeves said nothing. Pierce opened a folder on his desk. "I have reports here from 6 officers who say your modification is the most effective anti-pillbox weapon they've seen. I have testimony from 43 soldiers who say you saved their lives. I have casualty statistics that back all of it up." He closed the folder. "I also have regulations that clearly prohibit everything you did. So here's the situation, Private. I can court-martial you and set an example about following orders. Or I can send your modification to the Ordnance Department for evaluation and official adoption. What's the catch, sir?" "The catch is, you don't get credit. The catch is, I write this up as an engineering innovation developed through proper channels. The catch is, you go back to your unit, keep your mouth shut, and let the Army take credit for your work." Reeves met his eyes. "And if I refuse? Then I court-martial you, and your innovation dies with your service record." 30 seconds of silence. "I'll take the deal, sir." Pierce nodded. "Smart choice. Dismissed." Reeves saluted and turned to leave. "Private?" "Yes, sir." "Off the record. Good work. You saved lives. That matters, even if you'll never get a medal for it." Reeves returned to Charlie Company the next day. The other soldiers asked what happened. He said nothing. The modified blades stayed confiscated, but the Army moved fast. By August 1st, the Ordnance Department had tested Reeves's design and approved a standardized version. By September, they were manufacturing rifle grenades using the same principle. Hardened steel projectile, impact-triggered fragmentation, designed to penetrate firing slits before detonating. Official designation, M17, anti-fortification grenade. No mention of Danny Reeves in any documentation. The M17 entered service in October 1944 and was used throughout the remainder of the European campaign. Post-war analysis credited it with destroying over 400 German fortified positions and reducing American casualties in anti-pillbox operations by an estimated 35%. Reeves never spoke about it. He survived the war, returned to Youngstown in November 1945, and went back to work at the salvage yard. He married a girl named Ruth in 1947, had 3 kids, bought a house on the east side. He worked the yard for 32 years, cutting apart cars with the same acetylene torch he'd used before the war. He never talked about Normandy. His kids knew he'd served, knew he'd seen combat, but he deflected questions. Once in 1968, His son asked if he'd done anything important during the war. "I dug a lot of foxholes," Reeves said. That was the only answer he ever gave. The Army never told him about the M17 adoption. He didn't know his design had been standardized until 1983, when a military historian named Dr. Robert Kellerman published a book on improvised weapons in World War II. Kellerman had found Pierce's original report in the archives and traced the M17's development back to Reeves. Kellerman contacted Reeves and asked for an interview. Reeves declined. "It was a long time ago," he said over the phone. "I did what needed doing. That's all." Kellerman asked if he felt cheated that the Army took credit. "They can have the credit. I got to come home. That's enough." Reeves died in 1991 at age 68. Heart attack while working in his garage. His obituary in the Youngstown Vindicator mentioned his military service in one sentence. He'd served with the 29th Infantry Division in World War II and received an honorable discharge in 1945. No mention of the M17. No mention of the lives saved. His family donated his personal effects to the local VFW post. Among the items, a photograph of him in uniform, a Purple Heart citation from a minor wound in July 1944, and an old entrenching tool, standard issue, unmodified. The modified blade he'd used on June 9th remained in the Army archives, stored in a box with 126 others, labeled Confiscated Equipment, 29th Infantry Division, July 1944. In 2003, the National World War II Museum acquired one of the modified blades for its collection. The placard reads, "Improvised Anti-Fortification Weapon, circa June 1944. Origin unknown." That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through committees sitting in Washington, not through generals approving requisition forms, through privates from Youngstown who watch their friends die and decide to do something about it, through welders and metal workers and salvage yard kids who know how to make steel do what it needs to do, through soldiers who risk court-martial because saving lives matters more than following regulations. Danny Reeves built a weapon in the dark, tested it under fire, and saved dozens of men who never knew his name. The Army took his design, stamped it with an official designation, and never said thank you. He didn't need thanks. He needed fewer body bags. He got both. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.